Welcome to Know When to Save, a podcast about books, life, and where the truth can be stranger than fiction. I'm your host, Elizabeth Scozzari. Good morning! I am so happy that you are here for the last episode of Season 2, which is where we are currently at. It's very exciting for me, specifically because I did Season 1 as something that I wanted to do. I wanted to have a podcast. Don't know why, but I woke up one day and that is what I wanted. And it was during this time, as many of you would recall if you listened to Season 1, I had been in a relationship that wasn't serving its purpose for me anymore. I wasn't getting the things I needed from that relationship. And I also wasn't getting them from myself. I think it was a lot of distraction and a lot of my personal energy and whatnot was being sucked into what was starting to feel like a black hole. Just never-ending, deep pull down below. And that's not what I wanted. But one thing I did want, in addition to fixing that, was, well, I'm not going to say fixing because it wasn't broken, but course correcting where I was headed was to do a podcast. And so I did both. Season 1 had its ups and downs. I think that Season 2 has had a lot of better moments. I think I've gotten more calm and more at ease at doing this. And I also think that I've been able to be a little more succinct and a little more focused, which is kind of how I feel overall about where I've been the past year. Season 1 was a lot of like, this is what I don't want, and then trying to figure out what I did want. This past year and throughout this podcast, I know specifically what I want. I know I am specific in my intentions for what I want, for where I want to go and where I want to grow from here. I want to remain onward and upward every single day and striving toward what my goals are and achieving those goals. And this podcast has helped me to not only learn a different set of discipline, but it's also helped me to work on speaking in a more focused manner, which is good for work, for personal, for a lot of different things. I had a 5th grade teacher. When I was talking with my hands one day, she had me sit on my hands. And like the first thing that happened, and I know it's starting to happen now because of the way I tell the story, but when I was sitting on my hands, my head starts moving and like back and forth, up, down, left, right, and it can be very distracting. And that sentiment was iterated again in the comment from the woman on the Birdman video. She made a comment about my frantic movements. One, it was lovely that someone even watched that review, and I think it's one of my more popular ones from when I used to do book reviews a couple of years ago. Also, it's one of my favorite books. But it was a good piece of feedback and criticism. So while I am probably too long into my intro at this point, the point I feel like for me of this season, or I guess like one of the highlight moments, has been becoming more focused and focusing my energy into specific things that I want, not just spreading it out everywhere. Putting my mind to what I want, putting my heart into what I want, my energy, my time, my focus into what I want, and being choosy and specific about it. We're going to talk about the 3 books that are carried over from last week's episode, and we are going to talk about one that is very special, near and dear to my heart. But we're going to just jump right back into the deep waters. And these waters run deep because the first book we're talking about is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. And overall, I gave it 3.5 stars. The beginning was a little slower paced, and I understood why from like a overall story perspective, but it was just a little slower paced, and I didn't quite feel as connected, not so much to the main character of Lady Macbeth, but to the overall story. And I think that's because when you first jump in, it is a retelling of Lady Macbeth is a retelling of William Shakespeare's Macbeth, which I have never actually read. I did read If We Were Villains, which I like ugly cried over from how much I fucking loved it. And that also has Macbeth vibes to it. But I think Hamlet and Macbeth, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a minute now, and I am not overly familiar with all of William Shakespeare's work. Just like broad stroke, not specifics. But the beginning of this book, Lady Macbeth, starts out from her perspective, her journey over to becoming Macbeth's bride. And at first, it is a very like deep perspective on women, how at that time the expectations put on them, the needing to be so very aware of every different part of who you are, how you are, what you do, what you say, how you look. Lady Macbeth has a very good snapshot of women of that time, a reflection of women of this time. And it's probably halfway through where we start getting like a real comprehensive story outside of this woman's quest for survival and to find some iota of joy in her new life. But I did like it. I liked the way that it was very introspective. I liked the way that the story moved and the settings and the descriptions of things I felt were very strong. It was very descriptive. And overall, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, a tad slow moving in the beginning. Overall, good story. 3.5 stars all around. Next up, we have Holly, which was supposed to be my transition last week, and I did touch upon it, so it should be no surprise that we are talking about it this week. Holly by Stephen King, 4 stars overall. I loved seeing Holly come back. As much as everything with however you feel about COVID, however you feel about the political side, the health issue side, there are multiple facets here. However you feel about it has no bearing on this story, because there is no other character who I would want to be bothered reading about during the COVID time period other than Holly. Because the way Holly approached COVID was exactly how one would think she would. And this story is not a COVID story. It's not about COVID, but it does happen during COVID times with masks and vaccinations and the way people talk about them and, the kind of setting up for like who feels what way. The villains and their cannibal diet and their carnivore / cannibal diet. Spoiler alert. But you can see it coming. I mean, within like, if it's not on the back of the book, within like the first 2 chapters, it's really obvious where we're going here, in my opinion. But the villains, their carnivore diet, their views on COVID and vaccinations. On the other side, you had Holly standing for all that is good and just in the world, logic and logical behaviors, thinking about things, and her stance on COVID and gloves, masks, vaccinations. The language used was amazing, and it all was so true to who Holly was. I think it also is very true to how Stephen King feels about things on like more of a political and also general health concern way. I'm not sure. I don't know for a fact what his opinions are, but from the things I've overheard and from the way this book was written, I am fairly certain that like Holly's representations stand very true to Stephen King's, which I think is very interesting how he was able to weave those together. It's always interesting too, as like someone who loves to write, when I look back at my characters, where my beliefs and their beliefs were in line and where they weren't. So that's always interesting, but that's a whole other conversation for a different day, maybe next season. But specifically to Holly, it does take time. It does occur during COVID times, and it is deeply fascinating. Well, what is the story of Holly? Because I think I gave a piss poor description of what it was and just how it tackled COVID-19. But the story of Holly, it's her running Finders Keepers. Her partner, Pete, has COVID. She's just experienced a recent loss in her life. She's processing that. And this case comes in about a missing girl. Holly's on the fence. She really should be taking the next couple of days or weeks off. Besides, she doesn't have Pete because he's out of commission right now. And she decides to take this case of this missing girl, and what becomes a one-off is actually a lot bigger and a larger case than she imagines. It dates back a couple of years, and because it's a spin-off of the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, or at least it carries the character of Holly from Mr. Mercedes into her own book, it does have that dual perspective of like the bad guys and Holly. I mean, they are bad guys, but I feel like the term bad guys brings up like a specific kind of villain, and I don't think that this book in general fits into that specific genre, but that probably doesn't make a shit ton of sense, but we're going with it, guys. We're going to stay focused and on topic to the best of my ability, which, since I'm still looking at my coffee all the way over there, we'll see what happens. But that is the overall premise. It was lighthearted in some parts and also very heavy in others. Lo and behold, it is a good story. It's a great bringing to life of Holly and her character. She does appear in a novella and also a short story in between. I haven't read them yet, but you can certainly do some research and check them out. From what I've heard about both of those, they were good. So worth the read for sure, especially if you liked Holly in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy books. Up next, in the vein of murder, it seems to be on this gloomy day, because there's murder in MacBeth, there's murder in Holly, and in the book My Murder by Katie Williams, there is also murder. This one, hands down, another one of those really unique books that I have never seen or heard anything like it before. It's about Louise and 4 or 5 other women who have all been murdered by the same serial killer who have now been resurrected. Part of their resurrection process is going to this support group. I think they call it like a survivor support group, which is weird because like they didn't survive. They all got murdered, but they were all brought back. And most of the women just call it group. And in this group, they kind of share their feelings, how they are processing things, how they are reacclimating to their old lives, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, because as you continue to grow and change as a person, not having died, just as you continue to grow as a person, sometimes you don't fit into that old life, the framework of your old life. Super interesting that all of these women were murdered and brought back, and then like, oh, here's your old life. Specifically to the plot, Louise continues trying her best to acclimate with her daughter, with her husband, with her memories. What she does remember, what she doesn't. All the while that she's acclimating and moving forward, there's a video game that comes out. It is a world that has a lot of tech heavy, I guess is the way to say it. All the locks are, you open them with your eye. Cars can pick you, instead of having an Uber driver, you just call the auto and the car picks you up and the car drops you off, and there is no driver. It's all technology driven. There's a lot of virtual reality and a lot of like deep gaming. Now, I will say, in my head, all of this, when, you know, you're reading it, sounds so crazy, not crazy, but like it sounds so tech heavy and so far off. But when you really like take yourself out of the book and think about it, if you go to use your face to open your phone and your eyes aren't looking at your camera, it doesn't open. So biometrics in general is just mind-boggling. We already have cars that do, to a certain extent, drive themselves. So, and we do have virtual reality games. I mean, I think of it's the dumbass laundry commercial, but like the woman is talking about how fresh everything smells, and she has like the virtual reality goggles on with like the gloves, and she's like, "You stupid gremlins," and I don't know why it sticks in my head. But like, we do have virtual reality games that do go this deep. I mean, I don't know if there's games like this out there. I wouldn't be surprised if there were or weren't. But basically, it is a very tech heavy world, and while everyone calls her Lou, so while Lou is trying to get used to her life and realizing that, like, things don't quite add up the way that she would have anticipated they would, there's also this game released. It's virtual reality. You can go into the game. You can play as one of the victims. You can play as the murderer. And it brings you to the scene of their crime. And it's virtual reality, so it's really immersive. And that's another interesting thread throughout this whole story. And Lou is left to face the very real possibility that she doesn't fit in this old life of hers, and why that might be. There's like a little bit of solve my own murder. There's a little bit of like what happens when tech gets so deep into our lives, and also just like a little bit of coming to terms with who you are as a person. Again, because she is a woman, in this case specifically, coming to terms with who you are as a woman and how you would like to participate in your life as such. And so it's very interesting from all of those different perspectives. I did give it 3 stars. It did have some funny moments. I just was like a little underwhelmed. I enjoyed it. It was definitely unique. It definitely had a lot of good about it. But there was just something about the overall story or like the way everything unfolds that I just felt a little underwhelmed by. So 3 stars. Last but not least, not even remotely close to least, probably one of those like save the best for last moments. We were talking about Secrets So Deep by Ginny Sain. And you might recall that I did cover her first book, Dark and Shallow Lies. I think it was actually last season, and I fangirled over it because it was so good. There was something about it I loved. And while I do have this moment of having like a book high when I first finish a book. It's like the best thing ever, and I can't breathe without it. Not all the time, but you know, you get that rush, you get that sensation. And some books are greater than others. Like when I finished my murder, I did not have a book high. But when a book gets me off like that and gives me that book high, holy shit, do I swoon. And so Dark and Shallow Lies, I swooned. I loved it. It was great. To be perfectly honest, I liked that book a lot. Secret So Deep blew it out of the water. Funny because both of them involve the water. But this one, to me, Secret So Deep was just so good. And I loved the first one. I think of it still from time to time. But there was something about Secret So Deep that just, ran straight through my core. I want someone to talk about me the way that Ginny Sain describes setting. Like the way that she describes any setting puts me there immediately. It is beautiful, haunting, moving, amazing. She has this incredible ability to bring setting into the story so much that it's its own character in the novel. And I just want someone to talk about me in the same regard that she talks about setting. I feel like that would be like, what a compliment to have someone talk about you that way. And I just loved it. I loved this book. The premise of this book is Avril goes to this summer theater camp. It's not really camp. It's an intensive theater program where she knew her mother and her went for a summer right before her mother died. And she is on this mission to find the truth, find clues, find anything to connect her to her mother. At the same time, Avril is also an actress, and this is a theater camp. It's very selective, and it's her going through the very intense and exclusive theater program with Willa Culler, who's amazing, world-renowned, wrote one of the most amazing plays ever. It is the only thing she's done, but it was her golden ticket claim to fame. And as you continue to go through this journey with Avril, you get to see snippets of the play, and you see this really amazing thing happen where real life imitating art, art imitating real life, and it all blends together in this very dense, haunting fog that ties in so many different moving parts of this story. There's a paranormal aspect, there's a teen romance, there's a couple of teen romances. I think it's technically a young adult book. I don't know. I fucking loved it, and I cannot speak highly enough of it. And throughout all of this, all of these different love stories and rehearsals, Avril is finding herself and finding the answers she came to find, even if they weren't the ones she necessarily wanted. So, tremendous read. I loved it. Cannot recommend it enough. There is a quote from this book. So I hate how I sound when I read. I also would like to try to make eye contact, but I feel like we're asking too much out of me. But it's such a great quote, and I don't want to butcher it. But we hear so much talk about finding ourselves, but really, I think it's not as much about finding ourselves as it is finding other people who know who we are and who can reflect that back to us when we've forgotten it. Everyone needs someone who will sing your song back to you. So I probably did a piss poor job reading it, but there is something in that quote, especially, I think, from someone who spent so much of last year trying to find myself or figure out exactly who I was and who I wanted to be and where those things were aligned and where they weren't. To this year, setting my eyes on specifically what I want and who I want to become. And becoming is a very big theme in this book. Again, it's really, really tremendously well done, in my opinion. Just the characters, the movement, the haunting, like all different kinds of haunting. Paranormal haunting, the haunting we carry with us, the things that have haunted us in our lives, the way that we probably haunt other people and don't realize it. Like, there's just so many layers, and it was just such a tremendous book. I also had the privilege of working with Ginny Sain in a mentorship program. And so while, yes, I will say there's the opportunity for bias, the only reason I reached out to her for this program was because of Dark and Shallow Lies. I read it, loved it, tried to like not fangirl out when I met her. And so reading her second novel after getting to work with her, I was afraid it might heavily influence one way or the other. But it didn't, because she's fucking amazing. And if you have not read her work yet, like, just go out and do it. Secrets So Deep, Dark and Shallow Lies, doesn't matter. She does have a third novel, who, shame on me because the name escapes me off the top of my head, and a fourth one coming out in March. So check them out, check her out. Amazing person. Also does a lot of amazing work for writers, from mentorship programs to query packages and helping people get a good query package put together. She really is a writer's writer and stands by the craft, and also not only growing herself as a person, but growing the writers around her. So it's beautiful. She's beautiful. This book was beautiful. Fucking loved it all. I will say that I strive to be someone who supports others. I do it in my personal life, but I specifically, when I do meet someone who likes to write or wants to write or who does write actively, I always want to be a support for that person. So if you're a writer and you need support, you need someone to beta read, I love it. The closest thing I have to a referral for being a beta reader is if you read, and I'm looking for it, like I can just like, zoop. I don't have telekinesis yet, but There Is No Cloud or Cloud Judgment. Both of them are by Kate Wheeler, and in the second one, if you look in the back, there's a shout out and a special thanks for being a beta reader. Based on what Kat said to me, my comments and the things I pointed out did make a difference. So that was a fucking amazing feeling for me to get to be able to see someone's really great story and just help give them a second opinion or a third opinion or a fourth opinion, whatever it is. And that's how I feel going through my own work. You know, it's hard to kind of see not just like the forest through the trees, but sometimes it's hard to see where your plot points have holes or where something isn't clear because you're the one that wrote it. So it all lives in your brain. It's amazing to get feedback from other people. So if you're a writer that wants a friend or needs feedback, I am sending the invitation out there. In a more traditional no one is safe moment, since I know the past couple of weeks we've been talking about writers, tips, and tricks, and I've loved those. Those have made me so happy. If there is a season 3, I would love to do more of those. If you did not hear last week's episode, I did put a list of prompts on my website. Currently, there's October, November, December. It's 3 words for every day. Use them in a story as you see fit. It's a free resource. You can look online. So my website on like the mobile phone, because I'm apparently 1,000 years old, it doesn't always load the embedded version, but there is a link to download both on, it doesn't matter where you access it, the link to download is there. So if you need a resource, want a resource, if you're a teacher and teaching creative writing and don't want to come up with prompts, feel free to use some of those. Whatever works. It's free. You click it. You don't even have to sign up for my newsletter to get it. If you want to, great. I haven't sent out a newsletter in months, so no pressure. But I do want to do more tips and tricks. This week, however, we do have a no one is safe story. A moment, perhaps. So, my cousin is getting married. Coincidentally, this podcast episode will be out prior to this wedding, but that doesn't have an impact. I'm quite looking forward to it. It's my youngest cousin. He's the last one of the group to get married. I have no intentions of getting married, so I don't count here. But out of all of my cousins, he is the last one. He will be the last wedding that my grandmother gets to go to for her grandchildren. And, you know, it's a really special thing. And of course, like all families, leading up to a big event, there was a certain level of family drama. Nothing crazy, nothing big, nothing worth really delving into. But the one interesting dynamic to look at here, and it's a little more subjective depending on who you are, but one of my uncles, my grandmother, my boyfriend, like it happens sometimes where other people will be talking to me in reference to my grandmother and say mom, or they'll talk about my mom and call her my sister. They'll talk about my uncles and call them my brothers. And again, it's like a very focused kind of thing. My grandmother once at Christmas Eve said, I was standing next to her and she goes, oh, I want a picture with all my children. And so she's like, call Gary, call Annie, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, Graham. So I go to move and she goes, no, you stay here. And she like pulls me in close. So she wanted a picture with her children and she got a picture with 3 of her children and me, even though I'm not her child. But I did live with her on and off and I have a really close relationship with her. But, you know, I then said, okay, you take it with your actual children now. So I scooted out and then she got the picture with her actual children. But I do sometimes forget. It doesn't happen very often. This is probably one of the more outspoken times for me to have done this. I don't think I caused the drama, but I might have borrowed like a spoon, stirred the pot a little. Anyway, it wasn't on purpose. I genuinely was just trying to help and like help get my grandmother to this wedding without having anyone, you know, have to go crazy. My mom works, my uncle works, my other uncle's obviously going to be there already getting everything ready for his son's wedding. So I was trying to be helpful, all with good intentions. Lo and behold, after the pot had been stirred and everything simmered down, in my feelings, I was just all revved up because my grandmother is 94 years old. It is a blessing. It is amazing. In November, she will be 95. And she is just now going to start retiring from her job that she got after she retired the first time. She's been there for over 20 years. I worked there for 19, I think. Like, just a hair under 20. Like, she's been there for probably 40 at this point. And she is just this amazing bundle of light and energy and some chaos in there as well. But the reality is, and she and I have had this conversation, at some point the phone is going to run out of minutes. I definitely talked about this last week. And this is probably why it was on my mind more than ever. But one of my cousins and I, she and I were chit-chatting and, you know, we both were talking about the realization that, like, she's 94. This is like the last big event in terms of weddings and stuff that she's going to get to go enjoy. Probably. I mean, we hope not. You know, I want her around forever, but that's not really real life. And this is coming from someone who doesn't believe that most of this is real life. So take that for what it's worth. But we had gotten the prompts for the writing group that I've been going to on and off. The next couple of weeks will be interesting just from a scheduling perspective if I can make it or not. But between the prompts and all of the family drama in my feels, I just wrote this story about 3 children who their mother passes away, and they all are now faced with the realization of, like, what do I do now? These are very real people. Obviously, they're my mom and my uncles. Like, there's no surprise there. But what was interesting to me is I don't think it's a great story. It's not one of my favorite stories that I've written. I would actually venture to guess that if you put it on a rating scale, it's probably on, like, kind of like, not a crappy story, but like, just not great. It is what it is. It's just kind of there. And I think that comes from the fact of where I've gone in my writing journey. When I take influences from real life and fictionalize them and like play with them and twist them and knead them out and then stretch them out and, like, I feel like I'm making a pizza over here, but taking inspiration from real life, I think, gives me a better ground or a better foundation for writing a completely fictionalized, much better story than when I took so heartily from real life, said, you're coming in the story, you're coming in the story, and you're coming in the story. I cherry-picked my family members. And I think because of how real they are to me in real life, it did me a disservice in my writing. One of the pieces of feedback that I had gotten in this writing group from this woman, and her story I actually really liked a lot. It stuck with me. But she had said it almost feels like you're picking up a novel and, like, these are already established characters. And it's because I know them so well. So yes, on the page they are coming across as real and well-rounded individuals. But the problem is that you lose all of the making them a real person because they are real to me. And I know them, and it was just like a story that I banged out in my feels kind of thing. And it just is so, to me, it's so interesting how even when you're using something like a prompt or writing for a writing group or writing for yourself or writing a short story versus writing a novel, those are 2 very different kinds, in my opinion, of writing. And, like, they're very different experiences. I do maintain that short story writing, there's more leniency with grammar rules and punctuation and the things you can play around with, whereas novels are much more streamlined and there's an editor for things like that. But I digress. I did say it this time. I had made it the whole episode without saying it, but neither here nor there. The real life influencing the fictional worlds, I think, has a lot of pluses, but also some things to be mindful of. So when you're pulling from real life, we are going to end on a writer's tip. Woohoo. When you are pulling from real life, check yourself and say, like, okay, is this something that everybody would know, or is this something that I know? And then see if maybe that helps you to add more depth to your characters or make them more well-rounded. But I am so happy that I got to give you a writing tip, or at least in my experience kind of scenario. I am so, so grateful that I have been able to not only have this podcast, do this podcast, that people have been listening to it. It means a lot to me because it's just a goal that I wanted to achieve, and I can check it. And I am having fun, so we'll see if there is a season 3. I do have a couple of ideas. I said I'm not going to do it, but let's be real. We won't know until we get there. And sometimes that's the most exciting part of life. So make sure you continue writing. Make sure you continue reading. Make sure you do all of the things that make you happy. Tell the people you love them, especially if they're 94 years old. Just throwing that out there. But also don't forget that just because someone isn't 94 doesn't mean that they're guaranteed tomorrow. I mean, I woke up this morning, so right off the bat, I am incredibly grateful for that. It is a great day because I woke up this morning, and not everybody does. So cherish what you have. Make the most out of every moment. Put your energy and your time toward where you want to go. Be specific about it. Enjoy everything along the way. And don't forget that if you fuck with my grandmother, no, I'm kidding. I just, I'm like not even remotely intimidating. So sometimes it's fun to like, even though, hot. But just remember that in my world, no one is safe. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to No One Is Safe. This podcast means so much to me. If you've enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcast. For more content or more information on me, please follow my Instagram page at Elizabeth Scozzari Author and check out my website, elizabethscozzari.com. Thank you so much again, and go out and have a wonderful day. See you next week.